It's an interesting thing about most research is it's a kind of examination about how the way things are. But what I was struck by when I met Amanda Kimball for the first time is Amanda's not just satisfied with what's the way things are, but she's committed to how could it be. So while she herself is an extraordinarily good, competent researcher, she's also a visionary of the future of California. So her work, which she's been the research parent, birth mother, midwife, all the rest of that, of the work for UC Davis School on California corporations, is a chance for us to look and see, while this is a picture of the landscape, it's also a window into our future and where we want to move the levers and dials to change our destiny. So with that, Amanda Kimball, come on down.
Thank you. I am very pleased to be here today, and I think while I'm talking, I think they're going to load a new presentation for me. And I want to say a special thanks to Rayona and Gender Allies and all of the sponsors of this event today. I am very excited. And let me open by saying I am Amanda Kimball. I am a research specialist at the UC Davis Graduate School of Management. And I believe in gender equality because of the opportunity for this society to be something really great. So what Rayona was saying was exactly true about me. Thank you very much. And just to give you a little bit of my background, I sort of stumbled upon this study. The school started doing it 9 years ago. I happened to be a graduate student at the time and helped with collecting some of the data. And over the years, I developed a real passion for it. I grew up in a household where my mother reminded me how she had 3 choices in life. And wasn't I so fortunate that I could really be anything I wanted to be? So I grew up with a strong awareness that that was the case. And actually in my household, my mother and father both made dinner for the family 3 nights a week. So there very much was a lot of equality there. And I started working on this study and seeing how rare women are in these top leadership positions. I mean, we have candidates, female candidates for President of the United States. We have women Supreme Court justices. We have women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. But when you look at the numbers, there's very few of them. And I find this fascinating because it doesn't reflect the values that we have as a society. And I really do genuinely find this to be a fantastic challenge and opportunity for us as a society to move forward. Okay, so this is our study, UC Davis study of California women business leaders. We do this every year. It was just released in December. And let's see, where do I point this? And this is our main finding. So I get to be kind of the bearer of bad news here. I can see who's the bad guy at this conference. But again, I find this a real opportunity, and one of the best things we can do is actually look at the data collected objectively and then help raise awareness about what the situation is. So in California, among the largest 400 public corporations, there are 10.9% of top leadership positions held by women, and that's looking at the board of directors and the highest compensated, 5 highest compensated executive officers. Why do we look at those 2 roles? Because the data is publicly available. That, of course, makes it feasible to do the study, but it also eliminates any sort of bias from what the companies are choosing to reveal about themselves. And you can see that the Bay Area is only slightly better, not a whole lot better, with only 11.5%. And unfortunately, there's very little change over time. Now, the blue line here is women on boards of directors, 11.2%. The yellow line is women among these top earners, 10.5%, and the red line at the bottom there is women CEOs, 3.3%, and that is almost exactly the same figure as the number of women in the Fortune 500 right now. We had 13 women CEOs in this study. I think the Fortune 500 might have gone up a little bit, but it's still in the teens. There's surprisingly few women in that top position. And this, I think, is a particular challenge because we might expect it to be growing over time. And the fact is, women have come a long way. I mean, I know this conversation was going on in the 70s, but the context was different. It has changed quite a bit now that we have women in leadership roles. But the question is, how do we get more equality in those leadership positions? Because it's really about having a variety of perspectives around the table. And it's not just about the gender perspective, but racial diversity as well, and all kinds of diversity to get a variety of perspectives. So we looked at racial diversity among Fortune 1000 companies in California, and there were 85 of them. And you can see 3 out of 4 board positions are held by white men in particular. Now, what I think is interesting here is that the population of California is more diverse than the country as a whole. So white men are actually only 20% of the population in California, but they hold 3 out of 4 board positions. And non-white women, on the other hand, 30% of the population, and they hold 1.8% of board positions. So fascinating reversal there. Now, the Bay Area has a really interesting story because San Francisco County in particular has one of the highest percentages of women on boards, 17.3%. But Santa Clara County has one of the lowest with 9.3%. Now, I looked at the cities in San Mateo that are typically associated with Silicon Valley. So Redwood City, San Mateo, Menlo Park. And what I found was that those companies in those cities tended to have better representation of women than Silicon Valley companies, but worse representation of women than San Francisco companies. So I took that to be evidence that potentially the location of the headquarters of the company is some indication of the culture of the company. Now, obviously, the sector has a lot to do with it as well, but it might be a cultural issue. And in terms of sector, I wanted to point out that you do find that the high-tech sectors, which we find in Silicon Valley, tend to be worse than other sectors. So in the Bay Area in particular, the top sectors are financial services, real estate, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, and then the bottom half is hardware, software, energy and industrials, and semiconductors. Semiconductors, actually a statistical outlier, fewer than 5% of women in top leadership positions. Okay, so what's really going on here? We look at the size of the companies as well. So this is a breakdown by revenue, and I've just broke it into 10 equal-sized groups by revenue, and you can see that there's an upward sloping line here because the percentage of women in these leadership positions increases with the size of the company. And that is accounting for the fact that larger companies tend to have larger boards to begin with. And the solid dark blue line is the Bay Area in particular, and the light blue is Silicon Valley. And notice that at the low end, the really small companies have a lot fewer women. So that's really interesting because I think that it goes both ways. So in Silicon Valley companies, which tend to be in high-tech sectors, the smaller companies are much less likely to have women. But in my study, it's the 400 largest companies. So I think there are very possibly a lot of other smaller companies out there that are women-owned and women-led. And I know that there are 1.1 million women-owned companies right here in California. So it's important to notice that is something that might not be picked up by my study. But we do find this clear connection between size and percentage of women. And there are some companies that are setting a really strong example. So these are 20 of the top 25 that we show in the study. And you'll notice that all sorts of industries are represented here. A lot of these companies are actually headquartered right in San Francisco in particular, Williams-Sonoma, Medivation, and Wells Fargo. And certainly the Bay Area region is is well represented here because the Bay Area tends to have a disproportionately large number of companies that have more women than others. And you'll also notice that there's a good mix of the gender of CEOs, men and women CEOs. Now this is really interesting because I told you that only 13 of the companies in my study had a female CEO, and 6 of those 13 show up on this list. And that's evidence that women CEOs tend to help other women get into leadership positions. Now, the caveat there is that women CEOs get credit for being a woman among the top earners in the company, and they tend to sit on the board, so they also get credit for having a woman board member as well. But I looked at these numbers just the other day in preparation for this conference, and even if you ignore the gender of the CEO and one person on the board, there's still more women in other leadership positions when the CEO was a woman than when the CEO is a man. So I think of that as kind of a good news, bad news thing, because it kind of says that there is more that male CEOs could be doing, but on the other hand, it says that women CEOs are supporting other women and helping to promote women get women into leadership positions, which is wonderful. And another thing I think you'll like is that there's a real connection between company success and the percentage of women. So what we found is when we just looked at those top 25 companies that had the highest share of women in leadership, they tended to have 3 times as much the proportion of women and 3 times as much revenue and 40% more income. And specifically for the Bay Area, this holds true as well. The top 20 tended to have 3 times as many women, 5 times as much revenue as the average Bay Area company in my study, and 40% more income as well. So there's your business case. So here's some companies without any women on their board, and some of these are very recognizable companies. Open Table. Who do you think their customers are? No women on the board. Skechers, Tesla Motors, Monster Beverage, Pandora Media, Fair Isaac, no women on the board. And I will tell you, this list is a little harder and harder for me to produce every year because the companies that are most well known tend to put one woman on the board, so as to get out of the limelight there. So California has really set itself on the frontier here by passing this resolution 62, which I hope you've heard about, last October. It is a resolution, not a bill, so it has no teeth to it. It doesn't legislate, it doesn't mandate anything, but it passed both houses of the state Congress, and it urges companies to put more women on their corporate boards. And you might have heard the goal of 20% by 2020, 20% women directors by 2020, which there's a national organization, Women on Boards 2020, which I highly support. California has set a more audacious goal for ourselves. This resolution really says you've got to have 2 or more, really. And if you have 9 or more people on the board, you really have to have 3 women. And I love that idea because it's really about producing a mix of perspectives around the table. 88% of companies last December were not meeting those standards. Anecdotally, the company that produces our racial data, that collects our racial data for us, looks at the Fortune 100 across the country, and they have been finding an uptick in press releases in California since October. They think anecdotally that they are seeing that companies are reacting to this, which is great. And here is why it should matter to you. I argue from looking at this data, there's been very little change over time. Companies, for whatever reason, are not going after this issue in a big way, but I think they're like politicians. They're looking to their constituency to tell them what is important. And I would argue that this is a piece of evidence that supports the idea that visibility really matters and public pressure really matters. I took the companies in California that are not Fortune listed, they're on the left, and the companies on the right are the ones that are in the Fortune 100. So not just Fortune 1000, Fortune 500, but 100, the most successful, most visible household names in this state. and I found a big difference in terms of how they put women on their boards. Big difference in the share of companies putting 2 or more women, about 15% versus 80%. But not a very big difference in how many top executives they have that are women. And that is a contrast that is very difficult to explain. And the theory that I have is that visibility makes a difference. And these companies are getting pressure to put women on their boards. And they're not getting as much pressure to put women in executive positions. Because that's a little harder for the media to say, you know, you should have put a woman in this position. But on the board of directors, it's a little bit easier to say you could find at least one woman to put on this board. And examples would be Facebook and Twitter. They got a lot of pressure to put a woman on the board, and they both did because of the pressure. So this says that you matter, that you know, public outcry really makes the difference. And I have just a few other things I want to mention. One is Dave Jones, the insurance commissioner, is doing wonderful things in this area. He started a survey of all of the insurance companies that have to report to him, and he asked them about how many women were on their board. And of course, you can imagine there weren't very many responses at first. So he went to the legislature and he made it a legal requirement that the companies have to fill out this survey for him every year saying how many women are on the board. And I thought this was fantastic because nobody really wants to see a quota. But wouldn't it be interesting if we actually required that companies report to us on what they're doing in this area, report to us on how many women are on their board? The SEC has already required that companies report what they're doing on diversity, but it's a very vague thing, and it's not clear that the public is really behind putting that kind of pressure on companies. But here in California, we've made this big step, and it's possible that we could really see some change here. So I think that's really exciting. And here are a few things that you can do personally. We actually have a change.org petition for Open Table. It just says, Open Table, put a woman on your board. And please help us get the word out. Sign it yourself. Send it out to your friends. Get the word out on that. I recommend a book called Board Table by Betsy Berkmer-Creder, who is the California representative for National Association of Women Business Owners. She wrote this book on all of the different paths to getting on a board. So it will absolutely help you to get your first board position if that's what you're looking for. And also, I wanted to mention Pink 51, if you haven't heard of this. For-profit company just launched last week. It's an online website that is kind of Angie's List for women-owned and women-led companies. So you shop at Whole Foods. You go to Whole Foods to shop green. Go to pink51.com to shop pink. So that is my presentation, and I am certainly around for questions if you have any, and I have cards with me and would love to connect with you. Thank you. The book is called The Board Game by Betsy Berkmer-Creder. Thank you. Thanks.